Hi, it's Mark from Top Local. We're here with Bernie Pawlik, Pawlik Automotive in Vancouver, Vancouver's best auto service experience, and celebrating 30 years of operating as a company in Vancouver, BC, and only 22-time winners of Best Auto Repair. Bernie, what happened in the first 8 years?
We didn't win. I don't know. We're a small business, so it's just grown into winning some awards, which has been fantastic.
So today we're going to talk about a 2007 Porsche 911 that had a transmission fluid problem. What was going on with this vehicle?
So, well, initially didn't come in with a transmission fluid problem, but the client's concerns were that he'd bought the vehicle over the last little while, took it into a shop to get some service, and they replaced his transmission fluid as among some of the service. And after the replacement, he noticed that the transmission was, they may have mentioned it to him, or he noted that, especially when the transmission was cold, it was difficult to get it in first and second gears, and making the shifts in those gears was kind of notchy and grindy, and had a concern about it. And the other shop had kind of hinted, you probably need to replace the clutch, even though it had been done about 20,000 kilometers ago. But they kind of figured, the clutch is probably worn out. And he was not exactly keen on the idea. It's an expensive job, and seeing it had been done, figured maybe that wasn't the case. So he contacted us, and we had a look at the car.
So how did you proceed to diagnose and service the car?
So, with an issue like this, of course, a good discussion with the client is a really good place to start. What was done for previous service? When did exactly the issue happen? There's a lot of expensive parts at play with these cars, so it's good to kind of know when the issue happened. I mean, and this is the case with any car. So he said to me, immediately after the transmission fluid service, the transmission didn't feel like it shifted properly. So to me, that was a clue that something went wrong in that particular service. So he had brought me invoices, and they'd used an aftermarket fluid instead of the original Porsche fluid. And, generally that's not necessarily a bad idea, but we personally have had other cars, that we've changed fluids and not used the original manufacturer's fluid and run into issues with certain things like shifting problems. And so my suggestion to him was we should probably change it back to the original fluid. That would be the place to start.
So why would an original fluid be that much different than an aftermarket? Aren't they specifically kind of formulated the same, or to meet the same specification?
Well, you'd think so. And a lot of times when you look on the label of a certain fluid, it'll say this fluid meets this specification, and it meets the OEM specs. But really, a lot of times the manufacturer's fluids, they'll slip some kind of subtle ingredient in that makes a difference with the friction materials in the synchro mechanism. Or we have like Haldex units, which are for all-wheel drive vehicles, and sometimes you have to get exactly the right fluid, otherwise it'll chatter or vibrate. And so these are some of the things that make a difference with different fluids. Even though a lot of the aftermarket fluids are really high quality, they just don't always work with certain vehicles. So it's always safest to go with the OEM fluid. Unfortunately, they often cost substantially more money, but you want the car to work right, and you don't need to change fluids that often. So it's usually worth the extra price, especially if it doesn't work properly.
So you replaced the fluid with the original spec fluid from the manufacturer. Did you find anything else?
Yeah, well, this is where we found something else that was really interesting and no doubt causing the problem. And it might be that it would have worked okay with the aftermarket fluid for this other interesting issue that we found. So I'm just going to go for a screen share here. So there's our nice 911 4S convertible. What else can you say? It's a beautiful Porsche sports car. What else we found was that when we went to change the fluid, my technician, Ed, fortunately actually captured the old oil. And what he found was 7 liters of fluid in this transmission, and the actual fill spec is 3 liters. For some reason, on the original bill, there was 5 liters of fluid, and I'd ordered 5 from Porsche, not really looking at the factory spec. And then when we went to fill the transmission, we found that it had been overfilled by basically, this represents about 3 liters, which is the amount of fluid that should have been in the transmission, but this is how much we took out of it.
Was that both of those together, what you took out?
Yeah, both of these together is what we took out. So this is 7 liters of fluid.
So more than one bucket full overfilled.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, really amazing. And so, not only did this vehicle have not exactly the right kind of fluid, but it had far too much fluid. So, again, with the standard trying to move things around, and areas were lubricated that weren't ever meant to be lubricated. And there's a lot of fluid to be pushed around. Plus, the owner had said that, and I experienced it myself because we had the car a couple of days and I drove it. When the transmission was cold, it was much worse. And of course, it takes a while to warm up that much fluid. There's, more than twice as much fluid. Whereas if you had the normal capacity, as you're driving down the road, the fluid will warm up faster and operate better. So There was quite a few things going against the operation of this vehicle.
So how is it possible to overfill the transmission this much?
Well, that's an interesting question. And it's only because the way this transmission, it has two fill plugs on the side of it. And there's the right fill plug, which is located lower down on the transmission. Then there's the wrong fill plug. I don't know why it even has it, because if you don't know what you're doing, and obviously whoever actually did the service, this is done by, a reputable shop, but whoever was actually doing the service did not know that it was the lower fill plug you're supposed to fill it to, not the upper one. So this is why, yes, I don't know why it has an upper fill plug. It doesn't have to have it, and it really confuses people, but this is why you need to know what you're doing when you work on a car. And that's the reason there's an upper fill plug, and so it actually allowed the transmission to be overfilled.
Those sneaky Porsche engineers. How did the transmission shift afterwards?
It was really good. I went out for a road test, and sometimes it takes a while for the fluid to kind of work its way through, but it was, pretty much after a few miles of driving, it was pretty noticeable. It shifted really nicely, really smooth. Clearly a clutch was not needed, and it's a case, for use the right fluid, and it makes a big difference.
So there you go. If you're looking for service in Vancouver for your Porsche or Porsche, the guys to see are Pawlik Automotive. You can reach them at 604-327-7112. To book your appointment, you have to call and book ahead. Even now, they're still busy, and in Vancouver only, please. We're not dealing with you folks in the lower 48. Check out the website, pawlikautomotive.com. If you want to read more, there's over 600 articles on there about repairs of all makes and models of cars, videos on YouTube, Pawlik Auto Repair. And thank you very much for listening to the podcast. We appreciate it. Leave us a rating on wherever you're listening to your podcast at, whether that's at Apple or wherever. And thanks, Bernie.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for watching.